like at work, okay? I work with a lady who I have a really hard time working with her because she is not a very good employee, and so that makes things hard for everyone else who works with her. So let me tell you, like sometimes she'll be at her desk, but she's talking on her cell phone, right? You know the kind of person? And it's weird because we work, like our boss works in the same office, so she's like 10 feet away from him, but she's on the cell phone. I don't understand that. And so she's not very productive, and I have a hard time working with her, right? Now, what would happen? Now, would it make any sense if I went to my boss and I said, I thank you, boss, that I am one of your best workers, that I come to work every day, I don't take any sick days, I'm very productive, I'm not even like this other worker of yours. See, that would be a false type of thanksgiving. Here's why. Here's why. Because why would I be thanking my boss for my works unto him? Right? That makes no sense. So, on the one hand, you're saying, I thank you for what I'm doing. What you're really saying is, you should be thanking me. Boss, you should be thanking me. And in this case, that's exactly the Pharisee's heart. When he comes in and says, oh, I thank you that I'm not like everyone else. Basically, essentially, he's saying, God, you should be thanking me that I'm not like everyone else. That's the wrong heart. And so, when they go home, Jesus says that the tax collector was justified. The tax collector received the mercy that he was looking for, and the Pharisee didn't. The Pharisee wasn't even looking for mercy. Okay, let's look at the second story. It's in Luke chapter 7, so turn back into Luke chapter 7. That's the first story, the Pharisee and the publican. We're going to look at the Pharisee again, not the same one, maybe a different Pharisee. But now this one's not a parable. In Luke 7, verse 36. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. Now this is an actual story. This is not a parable. A parable is like an illustration. Okay, so Luke chapter 7, verse 37. It says, and one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. Okay, so he's going to this Pharisee's house to have dinner with him, to dine with him, right? And verse 37 says, and behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. Now, stop there. The scene is that one of the Pharisees has come to Jesus and he said, I want you to come to my house and I want you to eat with me. And then there's a woman who's, notice what it says, she's a woman in the city, which was a sinner. What do you think that means? And let me explain it a little better. Another English translation says that she was a woman of the city. And it doesn't mean that she's urban. Okay? A woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. So she brings some perfume with her. So she finds out that Jesus is going to be in the neighborhood. She says, I'm going to go see him. She brings this box of perfume, or this jar of perfume. Okay? And so they're reclining at the table. And so it's not like Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, where they're all sitting at a big table and they have a tablecloth and all that. That's not Jewish culture. So they're probably laying down, maybe halfway, maybe on their elbow, maybe on mats on the ground. And the table would have been in the center of the floor, and then a bunch of people either sitting around it or reclining around it. But they're sitting on the floor. Okay? So get that scene in your mind. And what happens is that in verse 38, this woman, it says, she stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. Okay, in this culture, people don't have nice socks and shoes like we do. So, and they don't have nice paved roads and take the subway everywhere. Okay, so they walk around on probably some dirty roads with sandals, and so she comes to Jesus, and he's not even facing her. He's reclining at the table. She comes behind him. So whoever else is on the opposite side of the table, they're looking at her do this. And so she comes, and she wets his feet with her tears. And I've always wondered about this, like, what does she do? Like, kind of stand over him, and then the tears fall down her face? I think she just has an uncontrollable weeping, and she's taking tears off of her face and wiping the Lord's feet with them. Get that scene in your mind. And she's wiping them with the hairs of her head. Now, she's a woman of the city, probably makes her living by prostitution, so she probably has this long, beautiful hair. So she's taking that hair, she's bowing down and wiping the Lord's feet. Very strange ritual, would not have been appropriate in Jewish society. And then she's kissing his feet, and she anoints his feet with the perfume. So it's like she takes her expensive perfume, which she probably would have used in her own trade as a harlot to put some on and to seduce men with it. She takes that expensive perfume and she anoints the Lord's feet with it. Now, watch the reaction of the Pharisees, because they're watching this. Right? So if they're all, let's say they're reclining in a circle, right? They're all kind of leaning on this table on the ground. So they're, at least half the room is watching her. And so it says in verse 39, when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, if this man were a prophet, if he were a prophet, he would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. I want you to notice that this man, he's not saying this out loud, he's just saying it in his heart. He spake within himself, saying, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what manner of woman this is that touches him. So first of all, this is not even appropriate in Jewish society that a woman would do this to a man, but much less a woman of that kind of reputation. So you can imagine the disgust in this Pharisee's heart, speaking within himself. He's probably like, are you kidding me? Do you know where those hands have been? Oh, she's coming here, or she's crying. Really? Her hair. Do you know where that has been? This ointment that she uses to seduce men. She's putting it on the rabbi's feet. So he speaks within himself. He's not saying this out loud. He's keeping it within his heart. And I want you to notice that Jesus knows his thoughts. In verse 40, it says, and Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have something to say unto thee. And he said, Master, say on. Did you catch what happened there? The Pharisee, it says, he spoke within himself. In verse 40 says, and Jesus answering said unto him. So Jesus answers the thoughts of his heart. So Jesus tells a story. Let's look at verse 41 and 42. He says, there was a certain creditor which had two debtors. And the one owed 500 pence, or 500 denarii. and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. So we catch that story. That Jesus tells the story, answering this man's disgust in his heart. Jesus tells the story. He says, okay, 2 men owe this creditor money. One owed him 50, one owed him 10 times as much. He owed him 500. And neither of them were able to pay, and the creditor forgave both of them. Who loves him most? And the Pharisee responds, the one who was forgiven more. It's going to end up loving him more. And so Jesus says, you have rightly judged. Now look what happens in verse 44. It says, he turned to the woman. So this is the first time that Jesus even turns around. So all this is going on. Jesus knows it's going on. He sees the expressions on people's face. But this is the first time he turns around to make eye contact with this woman. But he's still speaking to the Pharisee. So he turns around and he said unto Simon, in verse 44, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, and thou gave me no water for my feet. But she has washed my feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. 45, Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman since the time I came in has not ceased to kiss my feet. 46, My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman has anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. So what Jesus points out is, notice the evidence of grace and forgiveness in this woman's life. It results in love. It results in humility. It results in contrition. It results in weeping. That's the evidence of grace. So he's not saying that because she has done this ritual to me, I'm going to forgive her. No, it's the other way around. Remember, the debtor and the creditor. The creditor forgives the one who owed him much, and as a result, the debtor loves the master much. And likewise it is with this woman. The evidence of grace on her life, the evidence of her forgiveness, the evidence of her receiving the truth of Christ's message is that her heart flows out with love. Her heart flows out with affection. Her heart flows out with humility. And so, look what Jesus says to her in 48. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. So he proclaims forgiveness. Now, what did this woman know about Jesus? Enough to be drawn to him. Enough to be attracted to him. Maybe she heard his message. Maybe one day as he was preaching in the city, she heard his message. Maybe she caught a little bit of his message. Maybe someone else told her about it. And so when he's in the neighborhood at the Pharisee's house, she has this courage and this boldness to go into the house and come at the feet of Christ. And Christ says that there's evidence of grace, there's evidence of forgiveness, there's evidence of God's mercy being upon her. Why? Because grace worked itself out in love, in affection. And so he proclaims to her, your sins are forgiven. And then notice the grumbling of the Pharisees in verse 49. It says, they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, who is this that forgives sins also? But immediately they became indignant. Like, who does this guy think he is? So first, there's that disgust where they say, why is he letting this woman touch her? Who does she think she is doing this to the rabbi? And then when he proclaims forgiveness, they say within themselves, who does he think he is that he's forgiving sins also? It was understood that only God can forgive sins. So Jesus takes that role upon himself. It's weird to me when people say, oh, Jesus never claimed equality with the Father. Really, why does he forgive sins? That made him indignant. Who is this that forgives sins also? Verse 50, this is the first time he speaks to the woman in this whole episode. He says to the woman, thy faith has saved thee. Go in peace. Okay, let's talk interpretation. Okay? We can look at this passage and we can say, okay, only really bad sinners are going to deeply love Jesus after salvation. Because he forgives them. Some people have a little sin, some people have a lot of sin, and the ones that are forgiven a lot, then those are going to love Christ deeply. I don't think that's the interpretation of this passage. You see, love for Christ flows from an understanding of the grace and mercy that he has had on all of us. It's not that the Pharisee is any better than this woman. It's not that the Pharisee going to the temple is any better than the tax collector. But the woman, the difference is that the woman had a realistic understanding of her sin, while the Pharisee didn't. While the Pharisee who goes up to pray didn't, because he commends himself to God. He says, God, I thank you that I'm not like everyone else. I do this, I do this, I do this. So he had no understanding of his sin. So that's why the life of religion doesn't work itself out in love and gratitude and thankfulness. Did you catch that in both texts? There's no gratitude. There's no affection. There's no grace from those who were not humble. Those that humbled and sought Christ's mercy, there's gratitude there. Okay, so we see the gospel in two ways here. Okay? In the first text, the publican, the tax collector, he asks for mercy and he goes home justified. The Pharisee does not seek mercy, but he commends himself before God, and he does not go home justified. In the second text, this woman is drawn to Christ and she receives his forgiveness freely by faith. What does that last verse say? Thy faith has saved thee. Go in peace. So she receives forgiveness freely by faith. Now, where does this mercy come from? Where does that mercy come from? There's a lot of people who, when Jesus interacts with them, he declares to them, your sins are forgiven. God has given you the mercy that you desired of him. Think of Zacchaeus, the tax collector, who climbs up in a tree. He's short. He wants to see Jesus. Jesus says, Zacchaeus, you come down because I'm going to eat at your house. And Zacchaeus says, I'm going to sell half of everything I have. I'm going to give it to the poor. And if I've robbed anyone, I'm going to repay them 4 times as much. And Christ says that salvation has come upon your house today.